Hey, my name is Owen Hartley. I'm 37 years old, and I live in a rented duplex on the edge of Asheville, North Carolina, with my 9-year-old daughter, Wren, and a golden retriever who hides in the bathtub every time it thunders. I've spent 12 years driving an ambulance for a living, which means I've held the hands of more strangers on the worst day of their lives than I can count. None of that prepared me for a gray Tuesday afternoon in October, standing on a stranger's porch with a piano teacher's business card folded in my jacket pocket, about to knock on a door that would open onto the one face I'd spent 20 years pretending I'd stopped looking for. Wren stood beside me on the top step, swinging her backpack strap back and forth, humming some tune she'd picked up from the school choir. She was the one who wanted this. 3 weeks earlier, she'd come home from music class and announced, out of absolutely nowhere, that she wanted piano lessons, and only piano. And she wanted to start now, not next month, now. I hadn't asked her why. I had a pretty good guess, and it lived in a box on the top shelf of my closet I hadn't opened since the funeral. The air on that block smelled like wet leaves and somebody's fireplace 2 streets over. The exact smell of the October that had taken my wife from me 2.5 years earlier, which might be part of why I let a 9-year-old talk me into standing on a stranger's porch instead of just calling to reschedule for spring. The house in front of us was a converted bungalow with a wraparound porch. String lights looped along the eaves, even though it wasn't close to any holiday, and a small hand-painted sign by the door that read Maple Street Piano Studio in looping gold letters. Somewhere behind the windows, a scale climbed the keys, hesitated on the 7th note, and stopped. Then footsteps, then a voice, muffled through the glass, calling out, "1 second, just let me," and the rest of the sentence got lost in the house. I had exactly the length of those footsteps to prepare myself for anything, which turned out to be nowhere near long enough. The door opened on a woman still finishing that sentence to someone inside, one hand pushing a loose strand of light brown hair back from her face, the other holding a metronome like she'd forgotten she was carrying it. She looked down at Wren first, the way you're supposed to when a kid is standing in front of you, and gave her the easy, automatic smile of someone who's spent her whole life being kind to children she's just met. Then she looked up at me, and the metronome stopped ticking in her hand. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe it was just that every other sound in the world stopped, for me, right then. 20 years is supposed to be enough time to forget the exact shape of somebody's face. It isn't. She was still lovely in that same unhurried way she'd always been. But that wasn't what stopped my heart cold on that porch. I knew her before I let myself admit I knew her, the way you recognize a song from 2 notes. Ivy Bennett, 17 years old and covered in September sunlight, sitting at an out-of-tune upright in the empty band room while I invented reasons to hang around after school. Ivy, who vanished out of my life sometime between one Tuesday and the next with no note, no call, no goodbye, and left me standing at her locker for a week straight asking her friends where she'd gone, until even they stopped answering. For half a second I was 17 again, sitting on a folding chair in a band room that smelled like rosin and floor wax, watching her hands find a chord she'd only just learned. Then the half second ended, and I was 37, standing on a porch in October, holding my daughter's backpack strap because Wren had handed it to me without asking. Her mouth opened, and for a second nothing came out of it at all. "Owen," she finally managed, like she was testing whether the word still worked in her mouth. I had maybe 4 seconds to decide what kind of man I was going to be on that particular porch. I could be the man who turned around, walked back to the car, and told Wren the piano teacher had come down with something. I could be the man who said something sharp, because God knows I had 20 years of unsent letters worth of sharp things saved up for exactly this. Or I could be the man my daughter needed me to be in that specific moment, which was just a father here to ask about lessons. "Hi," I managed. I called about Tuesdays. Something moved behind her eyes. relief and grief arriving at the exact same time, and she stepped back to let us in. Just like that, the door was open, and I walked through it, and I had absolutely no idea what I'd just done to the rest of my life. 2.5 years before that porch, I'd made a promise to my wife in a hospital hallway I didn't know at the time would be our last real conversation. Grace collapsed at her desk on a Wednesday in March. An aneurysm, no warning, nothing anyone could have caught. By the time I got the call and drove to the same hospital where I'd spent a decade wheeling other people's tragedies through the doors, the only thing left for me to do was sit with her and listen to a machine breathe for her until it didn't have to anymore. She never got the chance to teach Ren piano herself, which had been the plan since Ren was a baby, since Grace never got lessons growing up and swore her daughter would. She used to say it half as a joke while she did the dishes, "When this one's old enough to sit still for 5 minutes, she's getting real lessons, not whatever my mother could scrape together." And I'd tease her that Ren couldn't sit still for 5 seconds if you paid her. And Grace would just say, "Give it time, Owen. Everybody sits still eventually." I made the promise out loud anyway, to a room that couldn't hear me, and then I spent 2.5 years finding every excuse not to keep it, because some part of me understood that walking into a piano studio meant admitting Grace was really gone and not coming back to do it herself. I should say something here about who I was before any of this, because it matters for what comes next. I'm not a soft man by nature. 12 years of pulling people out of car wrecks and overdoses teaches you to crack a joke instead of falling apart, because if you fall apart every time, you don't last 5 years, let alone 12. So I joke. I joke when things are bad. I joke when things are good. And I joke hardest right when someone's about to say something to me that might actually land. It isn't a virtue. Humor is just where you bury the body, Owen, my sister Paige told me once, and one of these days you're going to run out of ground. She wasn't wrong, which is maybe why, standing in Ivy Bennett's front hallway with my daughter already wandering toward the piano like she'd lived there her whole life, the first thing out of my mouth was a joke. "Small town," I offered. "Guess we ran out of new people to become." Her laugh came out too fast and too high, the kind that's covering for something underneath it. "Guess so," she said, setting the metronome down on a side table with more care than a metronome needs. "You have a daughter, Ren, 9. She wants piano, and only piano, and apparently it has to start today, which I'm told isn't how scheduling works. But here we are." "Today's fine," Ivy said too quickly, and I understood she needed something to do with her hands just as badly as I did. So we let the small talk about lesson times and monthly rates carry us into the studio, a converted sunroom with a black upright, sheet music stacked in loose towers, and afternoon light lying gold across the floorboards. Ren was already on the bench, pressing one key over and over, delighted with the sound of it, oblivious to the fact that her father was standing 6 feet from the only woman he'd never fully stopped thinking about since he was 17 years old. We didn't talk about any of that, not that first day. We stood in the doorway of 2 decades we hadn't touched yet and discussed key signatures and practice schedules instead. And when I finally shook her hand goodbye at the door, her palm stayed in mine a half-second longer than a handshake needs, and neither of us mentioned that either. It was only once I was back in the car, Ren buckling herself in and chattering about middle C, that I noticed the phone on the little table by Ivy's door had lit up mid-conversation with a name across the screen I hadn't meant to read. Derek, it said, with a small red heart beside it. I put the car in reverse and told myself it didn't matter. I was already lying to myself, and it was only day 1. The Tuesdays turned into a rhythm faster than I expected. Ren improved in that terrifying, effortless way kids do, going from one finger Mary had a little lamb to real 2-handed pieces inside of a month, and I started showing up 10 minutes early for reasons I told myself were about traffic. Ivy was a good teacher, patient in a way that had nothing performed about it. The kind of patient that only comes from actually loving the thing you teach. She never once brought up high school unprompted, neither did I. We built an entire second relationship out of the careful, deliberate avoidance of the only subject that mattered. Ren, who apparently inherited her mother's complete lack of tact, had no such restraint. "Miss Ivy said you have kind hands," she informed me one evening from the back seat, out of nowhere. "She said that?" "She said you have the kind of hands that fix things without breaking anything first. I don't know what it means, but it sounded like a compliment." I gripped the wheel and didn't answer for a second, because I did know exactly what it meant. It was the precise thing 17-year-old Ivy used to say about the way I held a pencil, and hearing it again in my daughter's voice felt like being handed something I'd dropped 20 years ago and had long since stopped hoping I'd get back. I bought a second-hand keyboard off a neighbor's yard sale so Ren could practice without waiting for Tuesdays. Set it up in the corner of the living room where Grace's reading chair used to sit, and some nights I sat in the kitchen with the door open just to listen to her work through the same 8 bars over and over until they finally came out clean. She got frustrated the way all beginners do, slamming her hands flat on the keys hard enough to make the dog jump. "I'm never going to get this," she told me one night, arms crossed, daring me to disagree. "Ambulance calls are the same 8 bars over and over some weeks," I told her. "You just keep running them till your hands know what to do before your brain catches up." She rolled her eyes at me the way only a 9-year-old can, but she went back to the bench, and 20 minutes later the run came out clean, and she yelled my name loud enough to wake the dog a second time, and I put down whatever I was doing and went to hear it twice. My partner at work, Priya, gave me endless grief about the 10 minutes early habit. "You drive out of your way for a 9-year-old's piano teacher," she needled one shift, not even looking up from the rig's paperwork. "That's not a coincidence, Hartley. That's a pattern." I told her to mind the road. She laughed the whole way to the call. It was around the 5th week that I noticed the ring, not on Ivy's hand, where a ring would normally live, but on a thin chain around her neck, tucked under her collar most days, visible only when she leaned forward to adjust Ren's hand position and the chain swung loose. Not showy. Real. I didn't ask. I didn't have to. A few days after that, I got to the studio early enough to catch her on the porch during a break between students, and I brought 2 coffees because it felt like the kind of thing you do for someone you used to know, even 20 years later. She took hers with both hands, like she was grateful for the warmth more than the coffee. And for once we didn't talk about lesson schedules. "You're not from around here originally, are you?" I ventured. "The studio, I mean. It's new. About a year," she said. "My mother died last spring. Aneurysm too, actually, same as your Grace, if Ren's got the story straight." She looked at me sideways to see if that landed wrong, and when it didn't, she kept going. "She had a sister here, my Aunt Dot, who'd been asking me to come help close up the house for months before that. After the funeral, I just didn't go back to Chicago. I stayed to finish the estate stuff, and then I stayed to teach a summer session, and then I just never left. It felt easier to build something new somewhere that didn't already have my whole life stacked up in it." "Chicago's where you ended up," I said. "After." "Eventually." She turned the coffee cup in her hands. "It's a long road from here to there, Owen. Longer than you'd think for a straight line on a map." I wanted to ask the obvious question right then, the one that had been sitting in my chest for 6 weeks, but a car door slammed somewhere down the street, and the moment slid past us, and instead I asked about her mother, and she told me small, true things, that Ruth Bennett had taught her the piano herself, on a piano that didn't survive the second move, that her mother's laugh used to make people in other rooms come find out what was funny. "She'd have liked you," Ivy said, then looked almost startled at herself, like the sentence had gotten out before she'd cleared it for release. "She always said the measure of somebody was what they did when nobody was grading them for it. You showed up with 2 coffees and no reason to. It was the first real conversation we'd had, and it ended the way most good ones do, without either of us noticing the exact second it became one. The phone call happened the following week, and I wasn't supposed to hear it. I was waiting on the porch steps for Ren's lesson to wrap up when the studio window cracked an inch for the breeze. Let Ivy's voice drift out low and tired in a register I hadn't heard her use with anyone else. I can't just pack up a life I actually like because you're in a hurry, Derek. That's not how this works. I sat very still on those steps and quietly took back every hope I'd let myself start building over the last 6 weeks. And by the time Ren came bouncing out the door, I had my face arranged into something ordinary. "You okay, Dad?" Ren asked, because 9-year-olds notice more than we ever give them credit for. "Fine," I told her, thinking about a call I've got to make. It wasn't a lie, exactly. I did have a call to make. I just didn't know yet that it would take me 3 more weeks to work up the nerve to make it, and that when I finally did, it wouldn't be a phone call at all, and it wouldn't be free. I finally asked her the question I'd been circling for 6 weeks on a Thursday that had nothing special about it, which is usually how the important conversations sneak up on you. Ren was inside doing homework at the kitchen table while her lesson ran late, and Ivy walked me out to the car afterward, the 2 of us moving slow across the yard in that early dark way October evenings have, and I just said it, flat, before I could talk myself out of it a 4th time. "Why'd you leave? 20 years ago. No note, no call, nothing. You were just gone." She stopped walking. For a second I thought she wasn't going to answer at all, and then, quiet, "You don't know what that year was like for me, Owen. So tell me." "I can't. Not standing in a driveway." She wrapped her arms around herself, even though it wasn't that cold out. "It's not a 2-minute story, and I'm not ready to hand it to you as one." I wanted to push. 20 years of wanting to push were sitting right there in my chest, lined up and ready. But something in the careful, exhausted way she said it made me back off, and I told her okay, whenever she was ready. And for once I actually meant it, even though every part of me wanted the answer that same night. I drove home 20 under the speed limit the whole way, turning her 4 words over like a locked door I finally had proof existed, even if I still didn't have anything close to the key. Ren picked that same week to ask the question I'd been dreading since the funeral. We were driving home from the studio, both of us quiet, when out of nowhere she said, "Do you think Mom would have liked Miss Ivy?" I nearly missed the stop sign at the end of Maple Street. "I think your mom would have liked anyone who was kind to you," I said, which was true and also a complete dodge. And Ren, who is smarter than I am on my best day, caught my eyes in the rear-view mirror like she knew exactly what I'd done and had decided to let me have it this time. "I found Mom's notebook," she said instead. "The one with the recipes in it. There's a page where she wrote, 'Piano lessons, Ren, age 7 or 8. Don't wait too long. I never got to, and I always wished I had. You waited till I was 9. I had to pull the car over for that one. Just long enough to put both hands on the wheel and breathe through the thing in my throat that felt exactly like it had felt in that hospital hallway.'" Ren didn't say anything else. She just reached forward between the seats and put her small hand on my shoulder, the way I do for strangers on stretchers, and let me sit with it until I could drive again. That night, after Ren was asleep, I found the notebook myself, tucked in a kitchen drawer where it had apparently been living for 2 years without my noticing. Grace's handwriting was smaller than I remembered, all sharp little peaks, and next to the piano line she'd drawn a small, lopsided treble clef, the kind of doodle you make when you're thinking about something you love. I sat at that kitchen table by myself for a long time, and for once I didn't reach for a joke, because there wasn't anyone there to make one for. Paige talked me into inviting Ivy to Thanksgiving before I'd even worked up the nerve to suggest it myself. She buried her mother a year ago, and she's teaching other people's kids to play piano alone in a house with nobody's name on the mailbox but hers, my sister said. Like this settled the matter. Which, to be fair, it did. Ivy showed up with a pie she'd apparently made from scratch at 11 that morning, out of sheer nervous energy. And Paige took one look at her, decided she approved, and spent the next hour telling embarrassing stories about me at 17 that Ivy already, technically, had first-hand knowledge of. He used to write your name in the dust on his truck window, Paige told her over the mashed potatoes, delighted with herself. In cursive, I have never let him live it down, and I never will. Ivy laughed hard enough to have to set her fork down, and I decided right then that dying of embarrassment in front of the two of them was an acceptable way to spend a Thursday. Ren sat between us at the table looking so happy it made my chest ache, like some part of her had been waiting 2.5 years for the table to feel full again and hadn't said so out loud. Somewhere around the pie, Ivy's phone buzzed face down on the counter, and I watched her glance at it, watched something flicker and pass across her face before she turned it over without reading it and came back to the table like nothing had happened. Derek called the following Tuesday to say he was flying down that Saturday. Ivy told me herself, her voice doing the careful, controlled thing voices do right before bad news. I wanted you to hear it from me before you heard it from Ren, she went on, since he's going to want to meet her, probably, if things go a certain way. A pause long enough that I heard a clock ticking somewhere behind her. I don't know what I'm going to say to him yet, Owen. I want you to know that. I genuinely don't. I told her I appreciated the warning. I did not tell her I spent the next 2 nights barely sleeping, running through every version of a man named Derek in my head, none of them good, and all of them, somehow, winning. Derek Voss turned out to be exactly as polished as the ring on Ivy's chain had promised. A cardiothoracic surgeon with a handshake calibrated 1 degree too firm, and a way of looking at a room like he was pricing it for resale. He showed up Saturday afternoon about 6 hours earlier than announced, while I was on the porch waiting for Ren's makeup lesson, and the 3 of us ended up in the single most uncomfortable triangle of my adult life, standing on the exact boards where I'd first seen Ivy's face again after 20 years. "You must be the piano teacher's friend," he said to me. And I understood immediately that Ivy had described me to him in exactly enough detail to sound harmless. "Owen," I said, "actually, I'm the dad." "Right, of course." He said it the way you'd correct a small clerical error. "Ivy mentioned you drive ambulances." "I do. That's admirable." He made admirable sound like a polite synonym for small, then added, "Must be a lot of pressure, lives in your hands and all that." "Every single day," I replied, "keeps a man humble, you'd know." He didn't look sure whether that was a compliment, which was more or less the point. 12 years of staying level while other people fell apart turned out to be decent training for standing on a porch while a surgeon condescended to me, so I just waited him out, and Ivy came outside with 2 mugs of coffee and stopped cold when she saw the 2 of us there together. I watched her run a fast, complicated calculation before she set the mugs down and said, "Careful. Derek, I told you I needed the weekend. I flew down because I love you, and you've been avoiding a very simple question for 3 weeks, he said. And then, because men like Derek can't resist twisting a knife they don't even know is there, he turned to me. Has she told you her party trick yet? Disappearing without a word. Ask anyone from her old life in Chicago. She's very good at leaving before things get complicated. Something old and ugly rose up in my chest, 20 years of an unfinished wound. But before I could say a word, Ivy stepped between us, her voice low and shaking and furious in a way I'd never heard from her. "Don't," she shot back. "Don't you dare use that against me. You don't know the first thing about why." "Then tell me," Derek pressed. "Tell him too, since apparently he's earned a front row seat." The porch went quiet enough that I could hear Wren's piano notes drifting faintly through the window, some simple scale, oblivious to the fact that her father's whole life was rearranging itself 6 feet away. Ivy looked at Derek for a long moment, and something in her face closed like a door being shut on purpose. "I need you to go back to Chicago," she said. "I'll call you when I have an answer, not before." "That's it? That's it?" He looked at her, then at me, wearing an expression that wanted to be a threat and only managed to look tired. "You're going to regret choosing a fresh start over a sure thing," he said, which struck me, even in the moment, as a strange way to talk about a woman, like she was a stock he'd decided to sell. Then he left, gravel spitting under his tires as he backed out too fast, and Ivy stood very still with her arms wrapped around herself until the sound of his car disappeared down Maple Street entirely. "I'm sorry you had to see that," she murmured. "Don't be. I meant it. I've seen worse on a Tuesday." She almost laughed, a wet, startled sound, and then didn't, and we stood there in a silence with 20 years and one very bad afternoon crammed into it, neither one of us brave enough yet to be the first to say the next true thing. I did what I always do when something gets close to the center of me. I joked about it. I did an impression of Derek's handshake for Paige over the phone that night, made her laugh so hard she nearly dropped a plate, and felt, underneath all of it, absolutely nothing settle. I canceled Wren's Tuesday lesson that week with some excuse about my shift schedule, which was a lie, and I knew it was a lie the whole time I was typing it. Wren caught me at it Thursday night, the two of us doing dishes, her drying while I washed. Out of nowhere, she said, "You always make a joke when you're sad. You did it about Mom's funeral, too. You told the guy at the flower shop a joke about lilies, and then you cried in the car for 10 minutes and thought I was asleep." I set the plate down slower than it needed setting down. "Miss Ivy does the same thing," Wren went on, entirely too calm for a 9-year-old dismantling her father in real time. "She makes a joke every time I ask her something real. You two are doing the exact same thing to each other, and neither of you notices you're doing it." "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been this smart. You just don't listen when you're being funny." She hung the towel on the oven handle with the finality of a judge delivering a verdict. "Are you going to call her back or not?" I stood in that kitchen a long time after Wren went to bed, looking at a phone number I already had memorized, thinking about Grace's handwriting in that notebook. "Don't wait too long," and about 4 seconds on a porch 20 years and also 6 weeks ago. For the first time in longer than I could say, I decided not to make it a joke. I drove to Maple Street a little after 8 that night. No lesson scheduled, no excuse ready in my pocket to hide behind. She opened the door already knowing, somehow, the same way she used to know things about me at 17 before I'd said them. "I owe you a story," she said, before I could get a single word out. We sat on the porch steps instead of going inside, the same steps, string lights throwing small gold circles across the boards, and she told it slow, the way you tell something you've kept folded small for 2 decades because unfolding it all at once might tear it straight through. Her father drank, and when he drank he turned mean in ways that left more than bruises, and the September we'd been together was the last good stretch before it got bad enough that her mother packed the car at 4 in the morning while Ivy slept, and by the time she woke up they were already 2 states away with a new phone number and a mother terrified enough to mean it when she said, "Don't call anyone, not your friends, not him, not until I tell you it's safe." A year became the boundary. A year became 18 months. By the time it might have been safe, her voice going thin, she'd convinced herself I'd moved on, and telling the truth meant explaining a father she was ashamed of to a boy she didn't want looking at her differently. "We moved 4 times that first year," she went on. "Different towns, different schools, my mother changing jobs every few months, so nobody could trace a paycheck back to us. I got good at being the new girl who never talked about home. It's a strange thing to get good at. I wrote you 3 letters. I never sent one of them. I was 17 and terrified, and I told myself silence was kinder than the truth. I was wrong about that. I've been wrong about it for 20 years. If you've ever spent 2 decades assuming you were the one who got left behind, you know exactly how strange it feels to find out you were only ever the one who got protected, without anybody asking whether you'd have chosen it that way. I didn't say anything for a while. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and went quiet. I thought about every version of this story I'd told myself for 20 years, the girl who got bored of me, the girl who found somebody better, and none of those versions had ever once been a scared kid guarding her mother in the dark at 4 in the morning. I looked for you, I finally admitted. For years, every reunion, every half-drunk search at 2 in the morning, I told myself I'd stop doing and never did, not even after I married Grace. There was one locked room in me I never let her all the way into, and I think some small, ugly part of it was you. I said it carefully, because it needed saying carefully. That's not a knock against Grace. I loved her completely, the kind of love that doesn't need comparing to anything else to be real, but a love like that doesn't erase an earlier one. It just learns to live in the same house. Ivy was crying without making a sound about it, the kind of crying that's been practiced quiet for a long time. I never stopped thinking about you, she whispered. Not in Chicago. Not with Derek, not once in 20 years. I told myself it didn't count as still loving someone if I never said it out loud. I was wrong about that too. I reached over and took her hand, the one without the ring around her neck, and for a long moment neither of us said anything else, because some things don't need a second sentence stacked on top of them. When I finally leaned in, it wasn't like anything either of us had rehearsed. It was slow and a little unsteady, and it tasted like 2 people setting down something they'd both been carrying since they were 17 years old. Ivy called Derek the next morning and gave him the answer she'd apparently already known for weeks. I wasn't in the room for it, and I never asked for details, because some conversations belong only to the 2 people who have to have them. The recital happened 3 weeks later, the Saturday before Christmas, in the community center on Charlotte Street, with folding chairs and a slightly out-of-tune upright and 40-some parents balancing paper cups of cider. Wren went forth, in a green dress she'd picked out herself, and before she sat down she leaned into a microphone somebody had set up for no good reason and said, "This one's for my mom, who wanted to learn but never got to, and for Miss Ivy, who taught me instead." Then she played a slow, simplified arrangement of Claire de Lune that Ivy had spent 2 weeks working down to 9-year-old hands, missing exactly 1 note in the whole piece, and recovering so smoothly that only Ivy and I, who'd heard her fumble that same measure 40 times in practice, even noticed. Paige sat on my other side, already crying before Wren's hands hit the keys, which felt like its own kind of family tradition. I sat in a folding chair with Ivy beside me and cried the way I hadn't let myself cry since a hospital hallway 2.5 years earlier, and this time I didn't make a single joke about it. Afterward, on the community center steps, Wren ran ahead to show her piano book to a friend from choir, and Ivy and I stood there in the cold watching our breath cloud in the porch light, the smell of spilled cider and pine garland drifting out through the propped-open doors behind us. She slipped her hand into mine the way she had that first Thursday in the driveway, except this time there was nothing careful about it. 20 years, she said. That's a long time to keep loving somebody quietly. Worth it, I told her, if this is where it was always headed. She looked up at me, and for once, for the first time in longer than either of us could probably count, neither one of us reached for a joke to get through the moment. We just stood there on the steps in the cold, her hand in mine, Wren's laugh drifting back to us from somewhere near the parking lot, and let the silence be exactly as full as it actually was.